What's up, guys? This is Phil Galfond for RunItOnce.com. I'm going to get into some footage at 510 no limit and 2.5 no limit zoom on PokerStars. I just finished playing this session, so my thoughts will be fresh. And on that note, I skipped ahead right now before I get started with all the footage. I want to talk about a single hand that I played. And something that that occurred to me as I was playing it. As this is kind of a more impromptu concept video, if you could even call it that. It'll probably be 7 minutes of video. I don't have a PowerPoint for you guys. I don't have any pretty slides and words to. So you'll just have to use your imagination. But I thought this was worth talking about, and I was pretty worried that, you know, if I didn't get to it until the third part of the series from this footage, I'd forget by then what I wanted to talk about. So the hand in question is on the bottom right table. I end up playing a hand on the bottom left table. As you can see, I have check raised the flop, and on the top, bottom left, and on the top left, I play another hand all in pre-flop with ace king. I'm not going to talk about those, as I just want to focus on this hand on the bottom right. I open with 7-6 suited. Get called by the button, and eventually the big blind folds. And the flop is king 5-2, and what I opt to do here is to check raise and barrel off on pretty much any run out. Obviously on hearts I have a flush, but you know, my reasoning, there were a lot of reasons that went into this. First of all, I felt he would stab a lot. Second of all, I want to maximize fold equity and apply a lot of pressure. And then also I have, you know, something nice in the way of implied odds. With really my only real risk of being, let's say, blown off of my draw with equity is if he shoves the turn and on a brick turn. And actually, I think most of his shoving hands on a brick turn will be flush draws that dominate mine, or at least a chunk of them. So that's actually not even a bad result. Anyways, all that's fine and good, but what I want to talk about is the main reason that I opted to check raise this flop. Obviously, the first condition is that he's going to have to bet when check to a lot, which I think he will with his mid pairs, with some air, and obviously his kings, obviously his flush draws. And the concept is maybe a little bit less highlighted on a flush draw board, but more so on a rainbow board. But essentially, given that I open from the cutoff and he calls on the button, this is a board on which I have many more value hands than he does. Essentially, let's say that let's say that my strategy is I want to check raise any made hand, ace king or better, and, you know, whatever semi bluffs and bluffs that I want, and barrel off. The only hands that have my value range beat are 5-5 and 2-2, which I am assuming he'll play pre-flop this way, but there are only 3 combos of each of those hands. Meanwhile, I can have 5-5 and 2-2, so I have those 6 combos. I can also have any ace-king, which is another 12 combos. I can have king-king, which is another 3, and I can also have king-5 suited, which adds another 3. So this is a situation where I have 24 value combos to his 6 value combos. And obviously there are more hands that, you know, king, queen, king, jack are hands that we can each have, and you could consider value hands. But I really like the idea that I can check raise for value such a wide range and be very comfortable about basically never running into better hands. And actually, when you think about it, when I can take those 24 combos and also add my 12 combos of king, queen, because even though he can have the chop, he shouldn't have ace king, so he's still stuck with only 6 combos that beat that value range. Meanwhile, now I have 36 value combos that I'm comfortable check raising flop and barreling off on brick turns and rivers, as well as some other turns and rivers, obviously. And this kind of shows you the power of deception and defining your hands pre-flop. I don't think that this implies necessarily that he should ever not 3-bet ace-king. It seems to me that most everybody in this situation does 3-bet ace-king, and I think, as you can see on the top left table, I'm through betting ace king offsuit in the same exact situation. I think it works out pretty well. But what it does imply, I think, is that you need to be a lot more cautious and pay good attention to your range post flop. I know that's something that Sean talked about in his video on bookkeeping. And it's just, it matters in PLO, but in No Limit, it becomes so much more important because hand ranges are so much easier to define. And so I guess I don't have much more to say than that, other than, take a look at the boards on which none of your opponent's range contains two pair. None contains top pair, top kicker. And then you're left with an opponent who has, very few hands to combat what could be a very wide value range from you, and then therefore obviously a very wide bluffing range. So in the actual play of the hand, I believe I check raise flop, or I know that I check raise flop, and I believe he just folded right away. I could have gone a little bigger here. I was actually distracted at this point in the session because I was getting some PLO action. Anyways, I'll leave you with that. Obviously, if you guys want to expand upon that discussion in the comments thread, I'm happy to talk about it, but I don't want to waste too much of your time on a concept that, while I think is pretty important, is also, relatively simple to explain. I'll be back in a second with the footage. Okay, so here we are at the beginning of my footage. Before I get going, I'm going to give you guys another little intro. There's a lot of value put into game theory optimal play, and a lot of value put into balance. And this is all by the general high stakes poker community, mid stakes, low stakes poker community, and certainly any kind of strategy. Either discussion forum or training site, and we have a lot of guys that are very excellent at balance and game theory, and even we have plenty of pros, and we also have guys in our forums that are great. I definitely don't want to make it seem like I don't believe in the power of game theory, because I absolutely do. I think it's kind of the future of poker. As games get tougher and tougher, it's going to be because players are getting closer and closer to optimal. I don't think they're nearly as close as most people seem to think right now. I think there's still a ton of room for improvement, a ton of room to get closer to GTO. But what I want to talk about is exploitative play and unbalanced play, and not really trying to approach GTO, trying to maximize your EV in every situation. And I think that while it's something that you need to be careful about doing against tougher players, I don't think you have to be as careful as you think. And if you are someone who is a good hand reader and a good guesser, is what I like to call it, then if you just try to stay balanced and use game theory, I think you're going to be missing out on a ton of value, especially in some of these lower stakes games. Not that 2-5 and 5-10 are low stakes, but the lower you go down, the more you get players who are playing poorly and giving things away with either their bet sizes, timing, just general strategy, anything else. And if you're not playing unbalanced in a way to capitalize on that, then you're missing a lot of value. And I personally, though I have always preached balance, and I do believe that it's important, I've done very well in poker, and I think that a lot of my success has been on outguessing people and adjusting in situations where I'm deviating from my balance game plan, or like my base strategy. So I went into this session planning on picking on any spot that came up. So without further ado, we'll get into the footage. I'm sure. Oh, here on the top left, right before I started recording, I played this hand. It's not all that interesting. The interesting part is that there are two interesting decision points. I get 4-bet after I 3-bet, and I decide to click it back pre-flop rather than jam, which is, whatever. I don't feel very strongly either way about it. I don't think it matters a whole lot, to be honest, so I don't want to waste your time on it. And I guess the other interesting decision point is we see the flop of 10-10-8 with 3/4 or 2/3 pot left, a little bit less, and I actually am not sure of the best bet size here. But I think actually with my ace king, my king queen hands, if I play them this way, probably not king queen, but with ace king, with like some of my bluffs that contain diamonds, with my queen 9 hands, 9-6 suited, I'm just going to want to jam. So I think having a jam as my bet size is fine, and I jammed and he folded. Anyways, on the bottom right table, I open the button, I call a small raise. From the small blind, I flop top pair. He bets 30 into 60, and with 200 behind, I think this hand just plays best if I raise right away. Obviously, I can raise small, and I can do that with my whole range. And there's not my entire range, but my whole range that wants to raise, I can raise small, and I can get away with some cheap bluffs this way, and obviously I can induce some value. But I think that in addition to being part of generally balanced strategy, this guy hasn't given me anything that I want to capitalize on or exploit. So I'm just going with what I think is a good vacuum play and a good range play, which is just to raise small here and call it off. It's a little bit of a loose open on the top right. I mean, as you guys know, or most of you should know, I don't really play no limit anymore. I haven't played no limit seriously in a very long time. So whenever I start a session like this for a video, I'm kind of figuring out even my pre-flop strategy still, and a lot of things are occurring to me as I go. Like the concept I talked to you about just a few minutes ago occurred to me during the session, and so I do think that you'll see me make some mistakes, and even some mistakes that I won't point out. Because I just am a little bit rusty. But I think what's important is, I don't know, the things I will point out are the things that I think are important. But we have plenty of good 6-max and heads-up no-limit pros on our site on Run It Once, so I would suggest that you learn pre-flop strategy from one of them rather than me. So bottom right table, we flop bottom boat against a short stack. I think that raising, while you got to know your opponent. I think calling here is the standard line. If I raise, I'm getting value from pairs, 5s through aces, and then obviously kings. But kings we're going to stack no matter what for the most part. Yeah, we're going to stack kings no matter what, so I don't really have to worry about how to play my hand against King X. I have to worry about playing my hand against his pairs, which he's not going to have a 4 almost ever, given that he's opening the small blind and that there's only 1 4 left. He'll have 5s through aces, certainly, in his opening range, and the majority of his range is going to be air. And so I think the best way to get value here is to call, let him catch up with his air, let him bluff with his air, and not worry so much about getting value right away. And I think that while this is kind of standard overall, it is a board that exploitatively I like to raise a lot against weaker players who expect me to have some follow-through, which I will sometimes, but maybe not as much as they might think. I call again on the turn. Once again, I think now that there's a gutter possible, or a few gutters possible, he'll probably be betting with all of those, but certainly not calling a raise. I don't think he's going to be 3-betting, certainly not like 3-bet jamming a gutter. If there was a flush draw present, I could be more likely to raise, but I think just calling down is entirely standard, and if he bets the river, I jam. If he checks, I bet. Bet size, I guess it's a little bit important. The thing is, I can't have any hands in my range that are air except for double floats, which, if he's reading hands, is unfortunate for me. The thing about slow playing here is that we're hoping that he bets himself. If he does check at any point, unfortunately, we do a pretty good job of repping a value hand. But as far as sizing, I think it is possible that he got here with, tens and decided there wasn't enough value, or maybe eights and decided there wasn't enough value. And, I guess occasionally he'll have a king, but then once again, it doesn't really matter what I do. I think that, I went with kind of a standard sizing, 87 into 120. I guess this leaves what I like about it is it leaves a little room for him to bluff jam, whereas if I go, 110 or something, that'll scare him off of ever bluff raising. But really that's a small consideration. I think he's just folding the vast majority of the time, and I really needed him to bet the river himself, which I think most of his calling hands, like 9x or better, are just going to bet for value themselves, so his checking range is going to be incredibly weak. And obviously those are reasons to float and double float sometimes, but the problem is you're going to face a river bet somewhat often, which, you've kind of wasted your double float in that scenario. But that is a reason that if let's say you float the flop and you get to the turn, calling bluff, like floating there might be a better option than bluff raising against a lot of opponents who are just going to play very straightforwardly on the river and bet 9x plus and check fold the rest. You kind of save yourself a bet when they do have a big hand because they bet it for you and let you know that they're not going to fold. So on the top right table, I call in the big blind against button open, and I check call on king, queen, jack, 2 diamonds with my 10-8 of diamonds. I don't mind check raising and starting to build a pot and continuing to bluff. Obviously, I think that to check raise here and then to give up on a brick run out is a mistake. He's going to be calling a check raise always with first of all, any king 10, queen 10, jack 10, a lot of the same king 9, queen 9, jack 9, potentially even just ace x, and then obviously just some random kings, queens, or jacks. And I do think that he's pretty likely to fast play some hands either on the flop or the turn, so you're usually looking at 1 pair by the river, occasionally 2 pair, assuming it bricks off. And I think to give up on boards like this is kind of a mistake. So I wouldn't have minded check raising there and barreling off, but I opted to check call. Kind of just realize my equity with a hand that can easily call twice and potentially value check raise when I hit. But yeah, I think really both options are viable. It checks through on the turn, and I go ahead and just value bet my flush on the river. I don't think he's checking back the turn with a flush draw very often. Not that it matters a whole lot. It doesn't matter because if one of us flush over flushes the other one, the hand's going to play out as it will. But the reason it's important is that I don't think, if he's competent, I don't think he's going to try and rep the flush if I check to him on the river, because he should know that he would barrel the turn with a lot of his flush draws. So I just go ahead and bet. Hope he puts me on. I definitely would have some bluffs here. Specifically, ace x or 10x pretty much, although a lot of my 10s that play pre-flop probably would have hit an 8 or a 7, which I may just not turn into a bluff. Probably wouldn't turn into a bluff, although maybe I would. So really I'm repping ace x as a bluff. Here on the bottom left table, I'm going to make a pretty exploitable and exploitative play of just raising small on the ace-9 rainbow board. You saw just a couple hands ago on the bottom right that I slow played when I had a boat. And, going completely against that in terms of balance by raising my bluff. But I'm risking 35 to win. What is that, 45? A little under 45. And I just think it's going to work so often. It's a board that he's probably going to c-bet 90 to 100% of his range, I would expect. So I get all of his air betting and pretty much all of his air folding. It's just a tough spot for him to do anything about this. If he has a pair, he can call. First of all, if he has a 9, I have plenty of equity against a 9. If he has an ace, he can call or re-raise. Obviously, that doesn't work out well for me. If he has an overpair to the 9, that doesn't work out great for me. But otherwise, just the majority of his range is going to be air. and giving myself such a good price immediately on a bluff and putting him in a spot where he's kind of handcuffed. I mean, we can get into like a clicking war with our ranges here, and maybe that's the way to go if he wants to combat this with his range against my range. But I think most players, a lot of players will, even if they realize you're unbalanced here, tend to give up perhaps more than you think they should. And it's actually not necessarily more than they should, because yes, you're giving them great immediate pot odds, but you have the ability to barrel turns and rivers with value hands and with bluffs. And so when you're attacking with somewhat polarized range, you actually gain a lot on future streets. So just calling now to guess later does get a little dangerous, even if he has a 9. And then obviously if he has some kind of float, it's not going to work out well for him to call against my range. If he does want to 3-bet it, then that's probably the best way to go if he wants to rebluff me. And actually, like I said, I think that getting into a clicking war here on the flop might be the best way to play for a lot of his range if he doesn't want to get run over here. But I don't think a lot of people do that. It's always a little bit interesting. Spots like this come up in PLO where when he bets and I raise, my range is polarized. And in theory, what you should do against a polarized range is call with your strong hands and your medium hands. And because if he has ace queen, he doesn't want to raise me off of my bluffs. Perhaps he can get value from a worse ace. So maybe that's not the best example. But let's say he has ace 7. There's no reason really to raise in a vacuum other than to induce like a clicking war. But really, when somebody's polarized and taking the initiative, you want to let them bet with their hands that beat you and their hands that don't. Like the most obvious example is on let's say somebody raises turn in position against you. Let's say it's no limit and the board is King 10 7 7 flush draw on the flop, and you bet flop, they call, you bet turn, they raise, and let's say you call with whatever you call with, doesn't really matter. Let's say you call with King Queen and river's a brick. You're not going to bet into them with King Queen because you don't bet into a polarized range. You let the polarized range bet. And then you pick which hands to call, which hands to raise with, and which hands to fold. And so it's a little bit different on earlier streets because there are hand protection considerations in play, especially in PLO. And also, but in general, it doesn't make a ton of sense to attack polarized ranges, except that you want to attack them with your bluffs. So the point I'm getting at is it's kind of weird because you're in a spot here with ace 7 in his shoes where probably the vacuum play is to call. However, you want to have a bluff 3-betting range on this flop because that's the best way to play your bluffs, in my opinion. So if you're doing that, you need to include some of your thinner value, like ace 7, in your 3-betting range, and then when you get 4-bet, you have to guess and start calling. But if you don't do that, you're just incredibly unbalanced towards bluffs, and I think against bad players, that's a fine approach to take. But I guess I just find it interesting that you may have to play some value hands in polarized versus polarized spots. You may have to play some value hands suboptimally in a vacuum to protect yourself and let yourself not get run over in those spots in general, because you need to be able to rebluff. So bottom left table, there's an open. I have 8-9 of diamonds, and he's short. If he was deep, I would just call here. Not sure how the no limit regs these days feel about that. But I mean, it's a great calling hand. Since he's a little bit short, I don't feel I can comfortably and profitably call, especially because since he's short, I actually have a higher risk of getting squeezed. Mostly because they can squeeze thinner for value, like in a spot where they might not want to squeeze with 9s to get in. Now they can squeeze with 9s to get in against a short stack or my range, which is presumably weak and wants to see the flop when I call here. And since they can squeeze and get it in lighter, they can also squeeze as a bluff more often. So I don't like to call here. First of all, because my implied odds against his range are not as good when he's not as deep. And second of all, because I don't want to get squeezed. So I opt to take this hand and 3-bet with it. You'll notice I 3-bet pretty small. I think that's all that's needed. I think back in the day, when God, I feel old. Back in the day when I played No Limit, the kind of general mindset with your pre-flop 3-bet bluffs, people played a lot more polar pre-flop, and they categorized their pre-flop 3-bets into bluffs and value. And with their bluffs, what they wanted to happen is they wanted to take down the pot immediately pre-flop. And obviously, they can play post-flop, but I think nowadays people have realized that with a raise this size, I don't necessarily take it down that often pre-flop because of the pot odds I'm offering him, but that's okay. I get to misrepresent my hand and take down a lot of pots post-flop, and I get to turn a hand that I may not be able to play profitably with a call into a profitable, hopefully profitable raise. So yeah, I'm not necessarily looking to take this down pre-flop. It'd be nice, and I'd be fine with that, but I'd be very happy to get a call and play post-flop with this short stack. I'm not going to make assumptions about him being a weaker player because he's short stacking, although I did just hover over his name and see Hong Kong, which there are certainly probably some good players in Hong Kong, but I have found generally they're weaker players, at least at this point. And that's something I talked about in a previous video, but I do use country reads whenever I get the chance, especially at lower stakes and at games that I'm not used to, and I haven't seen the players before. So I get called by the button. I believe I checked his location. It was Canada or Mexico, somewhere very likely for a U.S. player to have went to play. He's also on the right zoom table, so I'm going to assume he's a pro. I'm not sure what to make of his cold calling range. I think, I hate to use considerations based on my screen name because that's not going to necessarily apply in your games, but it's just the truth. I would expect him to expect me to be a little bit crazy pre-flop and unafraid. So I actually think it's unlikely he's slow playing here pre-flop, meaning I don't think he has aces, kings, queens. I don't think he has ace-king. I don't even think he has jacks, although maybe he could. I don't think so. So I actually think he's going to have king, queen suited, pocket 9s, 10s, 8s. Those are most likely hands, and potentially ace, queen off, ace, queen suited, ace, 10 suited. But on this flop, I think I'd probably just c-bet small, and that way I get to see what he does. First, if he folds, obviously that's good. If he calls, I know he most likely has a made hand, obviously. It's not a very draw-heavy board, and he's not going to be calling pre-flop with 7-8 or 7-4. So I would put him on, if he calls a bet, potentially maybe like an ace-queen type hand, but usually 10s, 9s, 8s, and yeah, probably ace-queen suited, that's it. As it turns out, we get led into small by the initial raiser. He's not going to have an overpair, presumably, given he's a short stack and there's a lot of money in the pot. He could have grabbed or shipped it pre-flop to either pick up or get it in. Probably decent against our ranges. I feel like this small bet, especially in this situation, is usually like a kind of a scared hand, somewhat weak. The thing is, if he flopped huge, I would expect him to check to get the check raise in. If he is a competent player, that's a pretty standard play to put me in a spot where I'm going to c-bet a lot of my range because I'm the 3-better, put the button in a spot where actually he's likely to call, potentially give him a chance to make a move, and then you get to act last and pounce, with a lot of dead money already in the pot. If he is not a strong player and is a weak player, I still think that it's pretty common commonplace for people to check to the razor, especially at 3-better. And especially with their strong hands. People like to get tricky, like to check raise with their strong hands. They don't like to lead, 40% pot with their strong hands. So I think he's somewhat weak. If it were heads up, I'd be pretty likely to just shove and try to take this pot down against him, maybe float. But with a player behind me who could conceivably have jacks, and I don't know, could be a little suspicious of my play with some other hands, I believe I opted to float here, see what Biggie does behind me, and make my decision on the turn. And my plan is, if Biggie folds as he does, to shove this turn if given the opportunity. Like, actually, I was actually thinking of jamming here. I was thinking of jamming. He checks, and then I actually changed my mind. I know that jam's obviously, a bit of an overbet, but I just thought he was folding almost always, and if not, I have my gut shot. But I opted to induce a call with a really small bet, and then obviously give him the chance to, if he is being tricky and trying to trap me, give him a chance to jam with his sixes or something. Whereas if he has a weaker hand like he was representing on the flop, he's very likely to call this bet. And I leave myself about a pot size jam on the river, which I think gets me a lot of extra fold equity. So I go super tiny here. I think this works really well against weaker players in spots where they are just very likely to raise to get more money in when you're betting small. Like if he's sitting there with sixes, for instance, he might be... I'm not really representing that I'm planning to jam river. I'm looking like I'm just going to bet and try to show down, and he's going to want to take an opportunity to get more money in. So I think that it kind of... probe bet is a different term, but that's in a sense a way to probe. Kind of an information bet to make sure that he will fast play his strong hands, and so you can be confident about your read in his weak range before you commit a lot of money. I think that's, obviously an unbalanced but exploitative and exploitable play. That works out pretty well in my experience. So obviously I'm going to jam this river. But then, surprisingly, he leads into me, and once again, very small. It's an interesting situation because if he's not making a blocking bet and he's not bluffing, then he's repping an ace. Either, I guess, potentially ace-queen, maybe like ace-4 suited that just made a weird bet on the flop, or ace-7 suited or something, and then called my small bet on the turn. And my chances of making him fold an ace aren't great. I do think they're non-zero. But if he shows me an ace here, if he shows me an ace, if like his card flips up and he doesn't know that it did, and it's the ace of spades, I'm not gonna bluff here. I don't think my pot odds are good enough. But here's an opportunity for me to do something pretty unusual, which is to make some reads. To get reads on this player from the only hand that I've played with him, which is currently still going on. And obviously these reads are going to be inexact, and that's actually another video I want to make on adjusting to reads that you're not confident in yet. I think it's something that's way underdone, and everybody waits too long before they capitalize on the reads. Anyways, I won't go on too long a tangent, or I'll just end it right there. But we saw on the flop that he led a similar sizing. He bet small. And while we didn't know at the time, we assumed maybe he was weak. He confirmed that read twice. First by checking the turn, which made it much more likely that his flop small bet was weak. Secondly, by only calling my tiny bet, not raising. Again, none of this is a sure thing, but what we learned was, on the flop he made a smallish bet. We assumed it might be weak. On the turn, he did two separate things that both made it even more likely that his small bet on the flop was weak. So now we have a hesitantly confident read that he bets small as a blocking bet or bluff. And here we are on the river after getting those reads on the flop and turn, and he makes a small bet. So we can be a little bit more confident that it's either a blocking bet or a bluff. Obviously, he's not going to have a ton of bluffs in this spot, so it's pretty likely a blocking bet. And I think that, that makes a lot of sense with his flop action. Betting small, check calling a tiny bet on the turn. Looks like he was making a blocking bet on the flop with maybe pocket sevens. Like, I guess ace six would be pretty bad for us, but he might bet bigger with ace six here on the river, given that read. But 6x, potentially, nines, potentially even a jack that he's, not super confident in. I actually think at this point a jack's very likely. Jack 10 or queen jack, and he just was afraid the whole time because I 3-bet. And now that the ace hit, he was going to check call the river, but now the ace hit, he doesn't want to check call. Now he throws out a block bet, so he doesn't have to face a big bet. Anyways, I am going to just trust the reads that I've made throughout the hand and go ahead and ship this river. Obviously, I will get picked off sometimes. Usually it'll be by an ace. I don't think he's going to call very often with worse than an ace, because people that take these lines with as blocking bets are generally weaker players, and the reason they do it is because they don't want to call off their stack. So when forced to call off their stack, they usually opt not to. But like I said, there's a good chance that that I do run into an ace, but I think that given the reads I made throughout the hand, I can be a little bit confident that I won't, and I'm getting such a good price on this bluff that I think it's important to take. And he does end up folding pretty quickly. I do wish we could find out what he had, because obviously it would confirm, or not, some of the reads that I made throughout the hand. But I mean, that's an example of basically playing to exploit him. Certainly with the turn bet more than anything else, the tiny turn bet to get more information about his hand and to set up a big jam on the river, which he actually didn't let us make the way we wanted to. So this player limps four-handed, and once again I'm going to make a read that he's a weaker player with, let's say 80% confidence in that, maybe a little bit higher. And sometimes I'm wrong and I make a bad play because of it, but more often than that I'm right and I make a good play because of it. Now I'm kind of just giving away my whole video that I'm going to make on the topic. Anyways, I decided to isolate with queen nine offsuit. I think that calling here is an option, but I'd rather uncap my range to the big blind, who's probably a regular. First of all, he can see, obviously, even if he checks, there's now a good player involved in the hand post flop, and also he can raise. Puts me in a very awkward spot. So I'd rather just isolate the player who I assume to be a weaker player and not cap my range to the stronger player and let him force me out of the hand before the flop. And again, I raised to 3.5x. I'm not expecting him, 3.5x. I'm not expecting him to fold right now, but that's totally okay. I'm fine with seeing a flop with a weaker player. King 6-6, I bet. And he calls pretty quickly. At this point, I have no pair, no draw, and he did call the flop on a board which contains, he either has a king, a six, a pocket pair, or a flush draw, or he floated with ace high. But for the most part, it's not draw heavy enough that I think he's calling with a ton of weak stuff like gutters, because there aren't gutters present, to fold the turn. I'd still barrel here with some hands, but they're gonna contain draws, and this is a board where there are a lot of draws I can be barreling with. Not that I'm super concerned with my range, but my point is queen nine offsuit here has so little equity, basically none, against his turn calling range that I'd rather just give up in this spot. So I do opt to give up and check. And he goes ahead and throws out a small bet of 35 into 88. Now, is it possible he's doing this with a 6 to induce? Yes, it is possible. Unlikely, but possible. Is it possible he's doing it with a king? Yes, very possible. However, kind of like the last hand, people that do this with a king are doing it because they're scared players. He's not trying to get value. He's just trying to kind of like not let me bet. He's trying to protect his hand. He's kind of just betting because he has a king, if he has a king, but he's not excited about it. And if I do attack it, I think that I think I can make him fold by the river, especially if the river completes a draw. So I think his range is mostly occasionally a king. I think he's gonna have a lot of pocket pairs given his preflop limp. Potentially some ace X that floated the flop, ace Jack, ace 10, ace 5. So yeah, flush draws, ace 5, ace queen, king X, and a lot of pocket pairs. So I opt to take the same line in a sense that I did last time, and set myself up for a kind of big-ish river jam. You could see at first I was going to raise larger, but I think that my best way to get fold equity. So like, let's say he is sitting there with a king, and I raise to 90. That does carry a lot of implied threat. Or let's say I raise to like 110. It carries a lot of implied threat, yes, but he's probably just going to sit there and be like, well, it's not my whole stack, so I'll call with my, king 10. And then he finds himself on the river, and now the pot's very big, and there's not much left in his stack, and now, when faced with a river shove, he just kind of shrugs and is likely to call it off. Whereas if I raise small here, I still get to represent a big hand, doing air quotes, but you guys can't see. But I also make it such that he is like significantly more likely to fold the river because that's kind of the point in the hand where I make it a decision for him. I find that with weaker players, you can get them to call you down if at no point during the hand do they feel like they're making a decision for their stack until it's too late and they're on the river and they have 2-1 or 2.5-1 pot odds and they're just like, well, now I have to call. But they don't necessarily realize that as the hand's going on. So if I did have value here and I wanted to get value from a king, I'd be more likely to go to about 95, 105, something like that. Set the pot up to be near 300 on the river and him to have 160. And then he's much more likely to, I think that he can still call the turn without feeling he's making a decision for his stack, and then he's kind of stuck on the river and likely to call it off. So, exploitatively, I do the opposite of that. I make a tiny, tiny raise that he's very likely to call, and it sets me up for a big river jam, which I am going to opt to take him up on pretty much any river. 5 is actually a great river for me. He didn't float the flop with 8-9. The only hand I'm really worried about here, for the most part, is 5-5. His flush draws missed. Obviously, his flush draws could be lower than, like, I could beat those already, but they're going to fold. King X, I think the board got a little scarier. I also think I left a pot to stack ratio where King X has a very reasonable chance of folding. And I also think that like 8s and 4s and 3s are just definitely going to fold. So I like the way I've set the hand up, and now I jam as planned. It looks like he's got a very tough decision, but it turns out he didn't because he had the flush draw with the gut shot that hit on the river, and so that time it didn't work out for me. Can't work every time, but I'm still very happy with my play. I was planning to check and give up on the turn, but he threw out a bet that made me pretty confident that he didn't have a hand that he wanted to go with, and though I did consider, it didn't occur to me that he would have rivered a straight. I guess he did in like one of the only couple ways possible. But it doesn't change my plan, and it's such a small part of his overall range that I think that play is going to work very well against the range that I expect him to have. And you can see now that even though I got called the second time I made a big play like that, but both times I made reads on players that I'd never seen before, based on the way that they played during the hand on all the streets. This last player, he limped pre-flop, which I gathered a lot from, or made a lot of assumptions based on, and then he bet small in turn, which I made a lot of assumptions based on. And I think that just attacking anytime you have a little bit of a read and trusting your gut, and trusting your experience. If you're a professional, you've played a lot of hands, and if you're playing against somebody weaker, you're just going to have so much more experience in them. You're going to know what things mean more frequently. So we have a couple of hands now on the bottom tables as we get ace-king offsuit on the top left. Bottom right, we open the small blind. I'm just going to c-bet mid-pair with backdoor straight draw, backdoor flush draw, and figure it out later. It's probably not a hand I want to go 3 streets for value with, but it's also not a hand I wanted to check call on the flop and kind of turn my hand face up, in a sense. So I'm going to start with a bet and figure it out. Meanwhile, on the bottom left table, I get 3-bet by a short stack big blind. I call with ace-jack offsuit, which I believe is pretty standard. And I flop top pair on a 3-diamond flop, and he checks. What do I think of his range? I think that a short stacker, whether he be a pro or a fish, I guess actually he's on my second table on the right, which I didn't realize at the time. I thought he might be more likely to be a fish, especially because I just played a couple pots with presumably weaker players. I think they're very likely to have a strong 3-betting range. It contains obviously all the overpairs on this board, as well as the ace-king, ace-queen. And the problem is all of those hands are capable of having 1 diamond. And I think that their line with 1 diamond is to check jam this flop with, ace-king 1 diamond, ace-queen 1 diamond, queens, kings, aces 1 diamond. Like, I think they play their hand that way very, very often. So I really am not comfortable betting here, because I think I'm very likely to face a check raise, and then I'm going to have to bet fold, but I'm not going to be happy about it because I am going to let him take down the pot with hands like ace-king 1 diamond, ace-queen 1 diamond, which I'm ahead of. So I have to check back and figure it out later. Complete brick on the turn. Meanwhile, on the top left table, there is a short stack raise and a, we don't have a big hand sample, but I have seen his name plenty of times before in the No Limit games. He's a reg, and probably a very good reg. His stats are, unfortunately not very significant at this point. We have him at 17-17. We also have him 3-betting quite a bit, but it's an 18-hand sample, so I'm not going to read too much into it. Basically, I have ace-king offsuit. I don't want to call here. I don't think it plays very well. I am just going to have to 4-bet and get it in, and kind of hope for pre-flop folds. I'm not doing excellent against his pre-flop jamming range, but I just think there's not really a better way to play this hand. I don't think you can really consider another option, actually, against very many player types. So on the bottom right table, sorry to be jumping around, but it's better than rewinding, which is not fun as a video maker, just FYI. I'm considering making a reasonable bet here, making a very small bet, or checking. Making a reasonable bet has the benefit of not giving away as much hand strength information, I think, as the other options. However, it's going to put me in a weird spot on the river where I'm not comfortable value betting this hand. And I still am going to check, and now I've built kind of a bigger pot against what now is a range that I'm not very comfortable facing a bet against, because I genuinely think it'll be a very tough decision. If I bet small, it has the benefit of making sure he floats with the hands that called the flop. And then I feel more confident in calling a river bet when I check. Kind of the same situation if I check, though, which is I can face a bet now and then face a river bet from a wider range. And I actually think checking in that scenario makes the most money, because the benefit of betting bigger is I get to protect my hand against a hand like ace-3 maybe that would fold, although he might just call with that again. But maybe like king-3 would fold. Whether he calls pre-flop with king-3 offsuit, I don't know. But certainly king-3 suited, I would expect him to. I think that king-3 of spades is a hand that would fold to a large bet, but call a small bet and also bet when check to occasionally. So, there's small benefit in protecting my hand against hands like that with 7 outs. But, obviously, those are hands I'd rather face 2 big bets against. And like I said, if I bet big on the turn, yes, I protect my hand from, hands that don't have a ton of equity, but now when I check the river, I'm facing a stronger range, and actually I've kind of helped him balance his range more, because now he's probably betting with, a range which I'm kind of indifferent against, given, how I strengthened it on the turn. I think if I check here, I get him to bet, all of his draws, most of his draws, especially his weak ones, and actually I get a larger bet out of him that way than betting small myself. And then, on the river, I will check and call, and sure, there will be value hands that beat me. And if the board changes, I may have to reconsider, which, it's pretty likely to change, but I'll trust myself to make some decisions. But then, I'm still facing a somewhat weak range, and I'm kind of comfortable just check calling the river there. On the bottom left table, I opt to just bet. I think if I bet 35 into 60 here, he's not likely to jam ace king or ace queen with one diamond. Certainly not without a diamond either. So I think I just get check calls from those hands. I could be wrong. I definitely could be wrong, and maybe checking back here is a decent option as well. Because when I bet, I actually am bet folding again. Although, unhappily. But yeah, I just think this is, it protects my hand. I don't think he's going to check jam here. I definitely am not confident in that, though. So in hindsight, I don't hate checking back in this spot to avoid facing a check raise. Perhaps I could bet a little bigger and make him more likely to check raise and call it off, but I do think still I'm not doing great against his range, even if it does include all of the ace king and ace queen with one diamond hands, because I think it still is likely to include the overpairs with a diamond, although he might have bled those on the turn. Anyways, my play I think is fine, but he just check folds, which is interesting, and if this wasn't Zoom, I would take a note on him, but he's gone. I face a bet on the bottom right table. I'm definitely going to call. River's basically as bricky as it gets. I think, like the Jack X hands are not going to be floats that are very often in his range unless he has clubs. Even like Jack 3 suited, like Jack 3 offsuit probably isn't in his pre-flop range, or Jack 4 offsuit. And Jack 3 and Jack 4 suited may not float the flop. Probably float the flop, I guess. I don't know. But they're not necessarily in his calling range either. I think they probably are. Anyways, I'm just going to check call this river. If he has a 6, so be it. If he has a better 5, he may not value bet it, but, if he does, so be it. The thing about boards like this, in No Limit, there are so many combos of gutters on this board. I mean, obviously there's open-ender, 8-7, and 7-4 suited, but there's 9-8, there's 9-7, am I missing any on the top end? 9-8, 9-7, and then obviously, yeah, there's the open-enders, but most importantly, there are the one-card gutters, the 3s and the 4s. King 4 offsuit. Like I said, Jack 4 is possible, but that also means that Queen 4, 10-4 suited, things like that are possible, and when you look at how many combos of hands just contain 1-3 or 1-4, the combos just add up and up. Meanwhile, his value range is going to be pretty thin. First of all, he would have had to not raise the flop with, like 3-4, deuce-deuce, or 6-5. Really, we're only looking at a 6, which there are only 2 6s left, and then occasionally, there's going to be Jack X, perhaps 8-8 or something that he didn't 3-bet with pre-flop, which I think is fine. But all in all, he's going to have so many gutter combos as well as his open-enders and flush draws that I think I just have to call here. And, not be too sad about it. Top left table, I'm a little sad, but I call. Fortunately, face the same hand. And I do actually run into a flush draw and a gutter. I think he played his hand in a very standard way. I like his line. I would be careful in his spot about playing the same way with all of his one-card gutters and his two-card gutters. Just by, starting by not betting the turn. You might say it's kind of similar, once he gets to the river with 9-7, what's the difference between betting that and betting 9-4 of clubs? And I would argue he shouldn't get to the river as often with 9-7. I think he should check some hands like that back. He should check some, like King 3 and King 4, he should check back. because otherwise his range is just way too bluffy against a competent player. But this is a hand that he played that I would include in my double barrel range once I call flop, because you have good equity, you have no showdown value. It's kind of the ideal candidate to bluff with. And so we don't know whether or not he would have bluffed with a lot of those gutters as well, which would make my call very clear. If he is only bluffing with good bluffing hands like this, and then betting his 6, my call becomes a lot closer. But, we'll never know. On the left table, I have an opportunity pop up, since I decided at this point that I'm going to take advantage of reads and play exploitatively. This guy checks back on 10-6-6. The turn is a very innocuous 3 of spades. I think he is likely to check back with ace x, king x, but pretty unlikely to check back with a 10 or a 6. He probably bets his gutters. Anyways, I think he's just very likely to have high card hand. I don't have a hand that I want to bet with, just because I have no equity. There are a lot better hands to bet with. But I just think that if I overbet this spot, and obviously this is something that I'm doing, my range is entirely unbalanced here, and when I'm doing this against weaker players, not that I know he's a weaker player, he probably isn't actually, but against an unknown that's never going to see me again, and especially if I think he's weaker, my range is probably far too bluffy here. But they don't know that, and I think that betting 45 here to win 21 is just going to work. I mean, 80, 90% of the time, probably over 80, which is more than enough. So I've got 47.5, and I'm sure he's suspicious, but what's he going to do about it? He folds, and I think this is a good point to wrap up the video. I think actually in that first part of the video I got more spots to take advantage of reads and play exploitably and exploitatively than I do throughout the rest of the video. I'm sure there are more spots that come up. But I will get into the rest of the footage eventually. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I guess, to sum it up, I would suggest that you not be afraid to play your range in an unbalanced way, especially when you feel you're up against weaker players, and you should not hesitate to deviate from an optimal strategy, even though I think that learning and studying optimal strategy and trying to make a base game plan around optimal strategy is great. Until people get much better, it's not it's not the most important thing, I think, yet. But I'll leave you with that. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I look forward to your comments and questions. I will see you guys soon. I think probably tomorrow with another video. This is Phil Galfond for RunItOnce.com. Take care.